On January 23rd, thousands of hopeful Venezuelans flooded the streets of the country to speak out against the Maduro regime and to demonstrate their support for 35-year-old National Assembly leader Juan Guaidó, who was proclaimed interim president of the country. It is believed to have been one of the largest marches in the world, but since the media is censored, this important historical event was not broadcast in Venezuela or around the world. A crackdown on the media by the country's authoritarian government has led to censorship, the closing of newspapers, and the jailing of reporters. For years, the few radio and television stations that remain have restricted press freedom. Venezuelan people have always had a strong culture of reading the newspaper on a daily basis as a source of primary news information that is no longer available to them, so they rely on social media networks. However, the government removes true stories from social media and replaces it with their own false posts. My family, who was in Venezuela during these protests, did not know what was happening in the rest of the country. My grandparents would call my mom asking for any information as the government shut down any access to the internet. The fact that we here in the United States had more access to information than the country's own people is unacceptable. But even without autocratic rule, we still have misinformation. In the United States, one of the oldest democracies in the world, it is a critical moment. News is traveling faster than ever before, and most of that information is being manipulated by people like you and me. Unfortunately, if not handled soon, our trust in the media is only going to continue to decay.
The word to describe this misinformation of the media and current events is called fake news. It is defined as propaganda that consists of one-sided information, deliberate disinformation, or spreadable hoaxes. It can be spread via traditional print, broadcast news, or social media.
Here's a newsflash. While many people believe that fake news is a new phenomenon, it has actually been around for over 500 years. During the Gilded Age, fake interviews, false excerpts, and bogus stories were on the rise. William Randolph Hearst, the owner of Hearst Group of newspapers, competed with others for readership. As a result, he invented what was then called yellow journalism. His publications exaggerated and falsified the sinking of the American warship USS Maine, which was docked in Cuba. It was ultimately a strong factor that contributed to the Spanish-American War in 1898. Let's think about this for a second. Yellow journalism actually caused a war. False information to the masses can indeed lead to drastic events. Fake news is having a huge impact on our society and is affecting the way we read, report, and distribute news to one another. We've already talked about how the topic of fake news has affected me and my culture, but how has that affected you?
I'm a student journalist here at Pine Crest. I'm a longtime member of our student newspaper and the yearbook, but let's be honest. We all have easy access to Type 1, but how many of you read it? How can we trust worldwide news from sources in which we are less familiar with if we can't even trust the spread of information from our own peers? I know that when we publish these stories for the school to see, we really try our best to get the facts straight. We fact check, gather our sources from credible data, and cater our sources to you, the student body. To initiate change, we must start with a discourse here on campus. As someone who is interested in joining the field of journalism in the future, I now have to worry that there may not be many sufficient jobs left to pursue if fake news continues to take a toll on journalism. Journalists around the world are being asked to change the way they report by limiting their personal input and focusing only on the strict facts, as many people think that journalists are altering the news and the headlines to which we are exposed. As more people are pretending to be journalists, actual news journalists are beginning to lose their jobs as well as their credibility. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of journalists being employed has fallen almost 65% since the year 2000.
On the other hand, the courage that these journalists have to share the truth is not going unnoticed. In fact, just this past year, Time magazine named The Guardians and The War on Truth as their Person of the Year of 2018. The Guardians are a group of journalists whose work has landed them in jail. Time selected this group of journalists for their courage to take risks and for speaking out as they search for the truth. These journalists are a symbol of something bigger than just themselves.
Numbers and statistics aside, fake news is a symptom of a greater problem. Knowing there is very little consequence when it comes to the spread of fake news, we might assume that people who own media companies are the ones who will fix this problem. But actually, it's up to all of us. The more we gain access to social media, the easier it is for us to share whatever we want, no matter how accurate the information is. So, how is our First Amendment right, freedom of the press, allowing all this misinformation to spread? This amendment is critical to our democracy, but is our government not acting strongly enough to be a watchdog and investigate wrongdoing? How can we curb this problem? Once fake news gets spread, the damage has been done and there's no turning back. Stopping fake news before it gets out is crucial.
In this point in time, the truth is that people are tuning out. They don't know what to make of all this misinformation that they're exposed to. They're presented with hundreds of facts each day, not knowing what to believe. It is easy to just crawl under a rock and pretend like nothing is happening, when really there are crucial events going on, like the ones that occurred in Venezuela these past few weeks. Putting the blinders on will not solve the problem of fake news. Our generation is supposed to be the change in the world, but how can we enforce these changes if we cannot distinguish the truth from lies? You sitting here today have the power to stop the spread of misinformation from continuing. If nothing gets done, our democracy will eventually fall apart.
Overcoming fake news is a challenge we will continue to face, but we have to realize that we are on the brink of losing the truth entirely if we don't stand the tide. So, the next time you read a news article, make sure to read past the flashy, often misconstrued headline to get to the core of the story. After all, the search for the truth begins with you. Thank you.